Welcome back to 110 Daily on the 110 Sports Network. Chris Brown is here with me. We got a new college football playoff rankings to talk about. And I know this is something I just need to get used to, but we're to the point in the season where the AP poll couldn't matter less, right? And of course there's some, and really the AP poll never really matters. It's just a number, and we've decided that the AP poll is the number that we're going to put next to teams' names. But what does really matter is the college football playoff rankings, where these teams fall in the hierarchy according to the College Football Playoff Committee. Not a whole lot of change at the top. The top six teams remain the same: Alabama, Notre Dame, Clemson, Ohio State, Texas A&M, Florida in the top six. But we had some moving around. Of course, we talked a little bit about it with Sam in the context of Coastal Carolina. But Mr. Brown, what stood out to you after the committee released their new rankings this week, after this weekend? Disagree with, surprised with, agree with? What do you got for me?
Yeah, so I had a couple of things written down, and I guess we'll discuss the Ohio State situation here in a minute as well. One small note that I thought was just really odd: Wisconsin dropped from number 16 to out of the top 25 following their loss to the Michael Penix Jr. lists Indiana.
Yep.
Yet the Hoosiers didn't move at all; they remained at 12.
Yep.
And I frankly just didn't understand that. I get that, right? There's not only so many teams that they could realistically jump, but IU went on the road without their starting quarterback and beat the team that was ranked 16th last week, and they didn't move at all. Meanwhile, you have Iowa State is the one moving up after their blowout against a 500 West Virginia team at home over the weekend. So that was an odd thing for me. Iowa State continuing its rise. That was another observation. They're up to number 7 this week. They're the first team that changed outside of those top 6 that you mentioned, which stayed the same. Iowa State, a win over Texas, a home blowout over West Virginia, like I said. But despite the fact that they're only a couple spots back of the top 4, it's still a team that I think is going to need a lot of help to get into the top 4 because Alabama and or Notre Dame could lose their conference title games and still be in the top 4. Alabama could lose to Florida, Notre Dame to Clemson, and it's possible that they remain there.
Right.
So I think that's a situation where Iowa State seems a lot closer than they really are realistically of pulling off an upset there. I think that's pretty unlikely. And then one final quick note here on as far as connected to that, the fact that Iowa State jumped Cincinnati, I think is a signal that Cincinnati has no real shot.
Yep. I think their chances effectively ended last night.
Yeah, they haven't played in 2 weeks. That doesn't help. But, also, this election committee referenced their lack of wins, Cincinnati's lack of wins against current top 25 teams. They had an opportunity against number 24 Tulsa, and then that game ended up getting canceled. So, yeah, like you said, I think their chances are pretty much done. So those were my big non-Ohio State related observations from what we saw with that poll, with the rankings being released yesterday.
Yeah, we'll get to Ohio State here in a second. First, Indiana, if you look at the teams ahead of them, either didn't play last week in Cincinnati and Georgia, and beating Wisconsin doesn't warrant a five place jump over those two teams. Everybody else won in relatively convincing fashion. Oklahoma beats Baylor 27-14. Miami beats Duke 48-0. So if you felt better about Miami and Oklahoma than you did about IU as the committee prior to last week, and of course Indiana not having Michael Penix Jr. absolutely has an impact here.
Sure.
I think whether it's fair or not,
that's a good
that's
point.
part of the and then Iowa State 42-6, Florida 31-19 over Tennessee, Texas A&M beats Auburn 31-20, Ohio State 52-12, Clemson 45-10, Notre Dame 45-21, Alabama 55-17. So my question, of course, there is, yes, you're right. IU beating a team and that resulting in Wisconsin getting bounced out completely, and then IU not moving up at all is peculiar, if nothing else. And if you're an Indiana fan, you can understand. I can certainly understand why you might be upset about that. But at the same time, if the playoff committee liked Miami and Oklahoma more than they liked IU prior to this week, I'm not sure what Indiana did in addition to comparing it to what Miami and Ohio and Oklahoma did gets them jumped up even further than that. And if they would have jumped up, it would have been 1 or 2 spots, right? So I would have been more happy with them moving up a spot or 2, but I understand why they didn't move up a spot or 2. So I think that's fair. Right. If you're a group of 5 fan, right, whether it's Cincinnati or, even more mid-major Sunbelt Conference in Coastal Carolina, listen, it's a conversation of, are you just tired of being upset about this? Because this is the way that the College Football Playoff Committee has always operated. And Sam, a couple minutes ago said the same thing, right? This is just how mid-majors are treated. And whether or not you agree with it, you might as well stop getting angry about it, because it's always going to be the case, right? It's right. Always going to be the case. It's just that simple. And whether or not right, I think this is the people who are truly mad about Cincinnati getting jumped by Iowa State are obsessed with the 0 in the loss column a little bit. Iowa State has wins over Oklahoma, Texas Tech, Baylor, Texas at Texas, and West Virginia. And Cincinnati, while they haven't lost, their only win against, they've got wins against Army, wins against Memphis, and wins against SMU. That just say what you want, but and I'm not even saying I necessarily agree with Iowa State jumping them, but if you're sitting in the College Football Playoff Committee's shoes, it's not hard to see why they want to do that. And as the team that is the ranking member of the Big 12 right now, the College Football Playoff Committee is going to put the best team in the Big 12 right now ahead of Cincinnati. They're just going to do it. That's what's going to happen. If you're going to be upset about it, fine, but don't be upset about it and think that it's ever going to change, because it's just not.
Right. It can't be a surprise because of, right, the things that, the things that they prioritize or the things that they value more aren't new. Like you said, it's happened before. It's going to happen again. There's no real, chance of that changing, right? The selection committee is going to care about the number of wins against high level top 25 teams much more than looking and be like, oh, well, look at that 0 loss. I mean, it's a clean record. I get it. I like it. And I'm not even saying, like you, I'm not even saying that I necessarily even support the Iowa State jumping Cincinnati thing, but like their criteria, the things that they place the most value on, it's not as if it's a shock what they're doing, the logic that they're turning to. So, like you said, yeah, if you're gonna be upset, okay, that's fine. I'm not even disagreeing, but you can't be surprised. You can't be shocked by the logic that they're using, because it's the logic that they pretty much always use.
Right. Let's talk about Ohio State a little bit here. We'll start with Gary Barta, the Iowa athletic director, chairman of the College Football Playoff Committee. He said number of games was critical for Ohio State. Is still critical for them as a committee. They wanted to see Ohio State play again. They got to see Ohio State play again, and they absolutely dominate Michigan State. That he said that played into why Ohio State stayed at 4th in these rankings. Right, and just to quickly touch it, they said they were impressed by what Iowa State has done from a body of work perspective. First place in the Big 12 was respect for what they've done instead of a disrespect for what Cincinnati has or has not done, just to throw that in there. But Chris, how do you feel about Ohio State being where they are in the most recent college football playoff rankings, right? You look at the rankings, they're only 5-0. Everybody around them has either double the games or double the wins, right? Texas A&M has 7-1. Florida 8-1. Those are the teams 5 and 6 in the rankings, followed by Ohio State. Following Ohio State, who's just 5-0. Your reaction? Do you agree with the decision to keep them fourth in the college football playoff rankings? What were your thoughts?
Yeah, I do agree with that decision. I think that, like you mentioned, you mentioned some of the reasoning, um, and I think what's clear is that they're still one of the top four teams in the country. And like at the end of the day, that's what it's all about, right? Like that's the end goal, whether or not you agree with the different criteria being used or not. I think there's just very little real debate that Ohio State is one of the best four teams in the country. And so I think that I'm completely fine with them being remaining in the top four. They've held steady in that spot, and you've got a situation where now the only teams that are in the top eight that are going to be playing this upcoming week are Alabama and Florida. So I would expect that Ohio State is going to hold there again.
Mm-hmm.
So now, of course, the big question with them is what happens because of the Michigan game being canceled. The Wolverines apparently would have been without like 45 players. So these two teams, Michigan and Ohio State, not playing for the first time since 1917.
Mm-hmm.
So they've been doing this a while. And now their eligibility to play in the Big Ten title game is uncertain. So that's, of course, up in the air. But I did read a report from The Athletic last night that there's optimism that that Ohio State will either get a game this weekend or that the league, the Big East, the Big Ten, will revisit their decision about eligibility because they had said you needed to get 6 games to be eligible to play in the conference title game. They're only get 5. I saw the Michigan athletic director say the other day that he would support scrapping the requirement, the 6-game requirement. So I think, I also read that the league's athletic directors are scheduled to meet today to discuss that, that aspect. So I have a feeling we're going to find out today something, whether it is them scrapping that requirement to get to 6 games or the scheduling of a new game in its place for this weekend. I have a feeling we're going to have a resolution on this sooner rather than later. But yeah, your original point, your question, I just like it could be made a lot more complicated than this, but I think it's just really as simple as there's just no doubting what this team is,
right.
Despite the fact that they only played 5 games. It's not a 5 games, and we really don't know who they are. It's
right.
5 games, and we know that they're one of the best teams in the country.
I think we're going to see, right, because the Big Ten benefits from one of their schools being in the college football playoff, and if Ohio State, if they waive the barrier for Ohio State to get into the Big Ten championship game, I don't think that anybody, whoever they throw in the, however they change the rules and they throw Indiana or Northwestern or whoever it might be in that title game against them, I don't think that Ohio State loses that game. And then Ohio State, right, it's Ohio State. They're now a Big Ten champion. That's going to get them into the top 4. I think that even if they don't get a chance to play in the Big Ten title game, but they get another game, whether it's, they find somebody else to play this weekend or they find somebody else to play in Big Ten championship week so that they get to 6 games. I think that will be enough if they're convincing. Of course, what you don't want to happen if you're an Ohio State fan is for Alabama to lose to Florida in the SEC championship game, because if that happens, nothing Alabama does, in my opinion, will get them bounced out of the college football playoff. I don't think that's going to happen. They've been the best team in the sport, one of them all year. They're first in the college football playoff rankings. They've been convincing all year. They're clearly at another level. But if you're an Ohio State fan and you've only played 6 games and you haven't won a Big Ten championship, and there's a Florida team that's just beat Alabama, and as a 1-loss team is the SEC champion, then you start to sweat a little bit. Then I'm in, right? Because then you just can't deny that, right? And you can't pick Ohio State over Alabama in that situation either. Here's ultimately where I land on this. I am all for putting the four best teams in the college football playoff. If this is how we're going to do it, four teams only can compete for a national championship, which is wrong in its own right, and I don't understand why it's so hard to go to 8 games, because none of this would be an issue if we would just go to 8 games. You would always get your group of 5 team in there, because there's always that one team that thinks they deserve a shot. They would almost always be able to get in there. Maybe it's just a rule that the highest ranking group of 5 team gets into the college football playoff if it's in the top 10 when you go to 8 teams, whatever it might be. When there are only 4 teams, give me the 4 best teams. And the 4 best teams in the sport are Alabama, Notre Dame, Clemson, and Ohio State. There is not a team, they're not Texas A&M, not Florida, not Iowa State, not Cincinnati, not Coastal, not nobody, not Indiana, not nobody, that I would favor on a neutral field over Ohio State. I might favor Clemson. I might favor Alabama. I don't know about Notre Dame, but you get my point, right? I might. There's a world in which Notre Dame is favored. That's essentially where this comes down to me. I'm much more interested in the 4 best teams in the sport getting a chance to play for a national title than the 4 best resumes. Because if you're married to the resume, then you're furious that Ohio State is still in the college football playoff. You're furious. And I get that. I absolutely do. But as a guy who went to bat for Georgia in 2018, after they had barely lost to Alabama in the SEC championship game and got left out of the college football playoff as a result, they were clearly one of the 4 best teams in the country that season. But they were a 2-loss SEC non-title team, a team that didn't win the SEC and was a 2-loss team, and so they were left out of the playoff, even though I really thought they were one of the 4 best teams in the country that year. I think Ohio State is clearly one of the 4 best teams in the country. When they've been on the field, that's exactly what they've put on the field, is a product of one of the 4 best teams in the country. So I'm not allowed to be mad with them being in the top 4 still, because I'm in the group of, I want the 4 best teams. If we're going to put a ceiling like this on who can compete for a national championship, I want the 4 best teams regardless of what the records say. Most of the times the records say the 4 best teams. That's how the sport works in general. But in a year like this, when an 8-1 Florida team or a 7-1 Texas A&M team is in the conversation with a 5-0 Ohio State team, I understand the frustration, but I think Ohio State is better than both of those teams. So I can't be mad.
Yeah, very well said. I think I really hit on what you said, the idea of, best teams over best resumes, because at the end of the day, you want to reward success, but you also want competitive playoff games. Like, you want the best teams. Like, I understand that you want to reward success. That's the point of evaluating resumes, and the idea of evaluating resumes typically, is to get to the team that is the best. But when it's clear that there's a difference between best resume and best teams, you want it's the playoff. You want the very best teams. I think that's what most fans typically want as their criteria, is the best teams in the sport. Mm-hmm. Therefore, most likely to be the most competitive games for your playoff format, no matter what sport you're playing in. Typically, of course, there's different scenarios, but I just think the idea of best teams over best resumes, usually they align. But like you said, when it's a situation where it's clear that there's a difference, let's put the best football teams on the field in the playoffs, right? Like that, I think it's kind of that simple, like you said.
And really the lesson here, like it is every year at this point, is, hey, let's expand this. Let's put more teams in the conversation to try and compete for a national championship. Let's do it. And most of the years, the teams that are clearly the top 4 are just a level above everybody else, and you will get those 4 teams in the semifinals. That will typically happen, but it'll make college football more money. It'll make more conferences more money. Sorry, you can't see my fingers. More money for college football, more money for different conferences, more money for mid-majors, and people are just happier because, I'm sorry, we're not going to have a bang it out conversation about whether the 8th team in the country or the 9th team in the country should deserve to go and lose to Alabama, who's the number 1 team in the country, or Clemson or Ohio State, or whoever it might be that year, right? That's not nearly as big of a deal, right? A 4 versus 1 is a second round matchup. That just makes sense. And very rarely does it matter if the 8 or the 9 seed plays the 1 seed. The 1 seed's going to win most of the time. But it would make people happy if we just had that order of operations, and you would be able to get more teams in. I don't see the reason why there should ever be an issue with that. Coming up next, we'll do the challenge flag. What are you watching tonight? Get out of here on a Wednesday. You're watching 110 Daily on the 110 Sports Network.